Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. Today's episode is brought to you by SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform. Dennis Hahn is Chief Strategy Officer at Liquid Agency, a brand experience, strategy, marketing, and design agency with offices in San Jose, Portland, and New York. Dennis is responsible for the methodologies Liquid uses to address the strategic challenges of clients like John Deere, HP, Microsoft, Motorola, NASDAQ, PayPal, and Walmart. In today's interview with Dennis, you'll hear us reference a 2013 video of him talking about brand experience. Here's a short audio clip from that video.
To activate your brand, you really first have to understand what the brand stands for. So understanding the brand's meaning is a vital component of that. Once you've figured that out, then you can use the brand strategy as a filter for thinking about the different dimensions of the experience. And those dimensions can go into different areas, such as the digital experience, or the experience with employees, or the product experience, or even the service. So those are the different ways that you can think about it.
I'll ask him some questions about that video and more to understand Liquid's approach to brand experience, as well as a concept Liquid is talking about more these days, brand culture. Here's the interview. Dennis Hahn, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Great to be here.
So on the Liquid website, I see the words brand culture makers. I'd love it if you could just start by explaining that tagline or that line. What is brand culture, and what does it mean to be a maker of brand culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually the question that we are trying to answer, and I feel like we've been working on this for about a decade. But probably the most succinct way I could say it is that brand culture is the best possible relationship that a brand can have with its customers and employees. So it's really an outcome. And I think that's an important thing to understand. It's not a thing you necessarily are actively building, but you're building toward it.
I see. So it's sort of success.
Yes.
It's a way to measure success of all these other things that we do, like brand strategy, and we're going to talk about brand experience as well.
Correct. And the makers part really comes from the fact that we're not just a strategic firm, but Liquid also makes things. And I think it's important, as you know, there's a big gap between strategy and the execution of that strategy. And sometimes things get lost in the translation. So I think being able to bridge that gap with some things that you put into the world that are evident of the strategy are really important.
Right. Yeah, I spoke, as you know, with Marty Neumeier last season, and I know he's a big proponent of prototyping and things like that in order to demonstrate the implications of a strategy. And of course, he's with you there at Liquid, so it makes sense that you guys would be of like minds on that front.
Yeah, we definitely have a strong design thinking heritage here at Liquid, for sure.
There's also a graphic on the site, and since this is an audio format, I'll have to describe it. It's a triangle with brand values at the center, and then company, employees, and customers on each of the three corners of the triangle. And then another layer out from that, there's service experience, employee experience, and customer experience on the outside. Can you explain that? What is that graphic or that model? Is it something you actually use with clients, or is it more just a visual to demonstrate the thinking behind brand culture?
Yes, so it's exactly that. It's a model that we use to, when we talk about what brand culture is and how you kind of get there, that's the model we tend to show clients and use. And it only took 10 years to make that triangle, by the way. The same.
It takes a long time to get to something so simple, I guess.
It does. And I think what it illustrates for us is that the relationships between a company, its employees, and its customers, and that they're all bound together by brand values, or what we also call beliefs. And when these are all in alignment between the company, the employee, and the customer, we say like a circuit of authenticity gets completed. And that's what creates the brand culture. So it's, in other words, it's what you say and backing it up with what you do and getting people to understand what they're buying into. And is my interaction with this company and brand authentic? Does it ring true?
But is that graphic just a depiction of the approach, or is it actually something you'd bring into a workshop and sort of fill out with the client, or maybe that you would deliver to a client as here's the version of this diagram with your brand values in the center, or is it not really intended for that?
It's not. It's
Okay.
really more to describe the philosophy and the relationships, because I think when you say the word culture, people either think of pop culture, and that's where the advertising business goes, or people think of workplace culture.
Right.
But when you bring brand and culture together, and the customer and the employee, it's an unusual pairing of audiences in the same model. And that's why it's so important to the work that we do.
Related to that, I want to understand the connection between brand culture and brand experience. So I agree. A lot of people would hear brand culture, and if they're thinking workplace culture, they're thinking employees primarily.
Yes.
And a lot of people hear brand experience, and right or wrong, they think mostly customer experience, which is I suppose, different but related term. Can you explain, and I don't know if it's depicted by that triangle or not, but can you explain how at Liquid you think of brand culture and brand experience being connected to one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess we see brand experience as the sum total of all experiences a person has with a brand. And that person could be an employee or a customer. So we think of it less customer centric and more broad. And those experiences can either be good or bad, or intentional or unintentional. So meaning every brand has an experience.
Right, whether they want to or not.
Correct. But we think of brand culture as a more aspirational state, a sort of nirvana relationship between a brand and its audiences. So brand culture is brand experience on its very best day.
And you mentioned design thinking as something that you guys make use of at Liquid. Are there any other methodologies or specific steps that you would use to create a brand experience for a client?
Yeah, so we have that heritage in design thinking that I mentioned, but also growing up in Silicon Valley, we have really applied a lot of lean startup type principles. You know how fast the valley moves, right?
Right.
So it sort of all gets expressed in one of our methods we call swarming. And swarming is our workshop methodology, essentially, and it's designed to attack a problem from a number of angles and unleashing the power of simultaneous collaboration between agencies and clients. So it's really a co-creation model. And that's where we use the design thinking and lean startup principles to guide clients through that co-creation process.
And I'm just curious about how different agencies create these sort of workshop methodologies. So is there a binder or a file somewhere on the server at Liquid of different exercises that you might bring into a swarm? Sorry, I almost called it a workshop. To a swarm.
That's a great question. So yes, there is a place where people can go, a repository with all the exercises that we do. We call them activities.
Yeah.
But all the activities that we put clients through are all in one central place. Now, swarming, because it's a method, we can swarm anything, right? You can swarm any problem. So we can do messaging swarms, we can do brand strategy swarms, culture strategy swarms, brand activation swarms. So the method is, so when we say we're doing a swarm, everybody kind of has a mental model of, okay, we know we're going to do this thing. And a typical swarm sprint is about 2 days.
Okay.
But we have done them in as few as 2 hours or as long as up to an entire week. So it's very scalable, and then it's modular. So basically, if you're going to do a brand strategy swarm, for example, there's about 5 core activities we do with clients over those 2 days. So you can go there and pull onlyness from our book Brand Gap and Zag. Which you're probably familiar with
Yes.
Talking with Marty. Onlyness is an activity that we do as one of the design thinking activities. So that's one. We do a cover story, which gets at kind of brand aspiration. We have a new one that we've created recently called Ideal Brand Experience, which we've only been doing for a number of months now, but with pretty good success. And so what's great about it is everybody knows how those things run. They know how the exercises work. They know how a swarm gets put together. So we can plug all kinds of people at Liquid into the swarm. We just have to get the clients to understand how to do it. And what's great about it is it gives us confidence and continuity in kind of our work methodology, but it also doesn't box us in because it is flexible, right? So we can add new activities if we want. We can extend the length of a swarm or even change the subject.
You mentioned a new tool that you're using called Ideal Brand Experience, I think. Can you tell
Yes.
us anything more? I know some of this is proprietary, but is there anything you can share about what's involved in that piece of a swarm?
Sure. So I would say 6 or 7 years ago, we started stumbling on this need with working with brands like Skype when we
Hmm.
rebranded Skype or Nordstrom, that the experiences that their customers have are the things that actually have the most resonance with what the brand is about, the meaning of the brand, and versus the communications or the other things that you might find in a typical brand platform. So we started to include hooks into the brand platform for experience. And we started
Okay.
with experience principles, which makes a ton of sense because you need principles that guide the experience. But we found that putting the experience principles in the brand platform alongside of expression attributes gets a little confusing because you have two lists of things and sets of principles. And as you know, these things, people have a hard time. What do I do with these? What do I do with those?
Uh-huh.
So we evolved it, and we have an aspiration for the experience, a higher level thing we call ideal brand experience. So that's sort of at the end of the day, this is what the outcome is. This is how we want the audience to feel as a result of having the experience with this brand. So that sort of sits at the top of the food chain, if you will, for experience, and that's what we put in there.
Sorry, is that a written out statement
Yeah.
or something like that? Okay.
It is, but we also pressure test it through scenarios. So we will often run customer scenarios through that lens or employee-based scenarios around
Hmm.
different experiences to try and get at the core essence of what kind of experience this brand is intending to deliver. And then
Got it.
we've built a follow-on framework, which is an experience principles framework, which once we've identified the ideal brand experience, it sits at the top of that framework. And then if we have customers that want to go deeper on really designing experience principles and getting to expressions for either employee experiences or customer experiences, we have a whole way of getting them there.
You mentioned that some of this thinking started about 6 years ago, I think. I wonder if that's where this video comes from that I found of you online. And it's funny because when I decided this season was about brand experience, my mind pretty quickly went back to this video that I remember seeing of you talking about Liquid's way of thinking about brand experience. Now, this was 6 years ago, so I'm not sure that it's still up to date, but you mentioned that you like to break brand experience up into digital, employees, product, and or service. Do you still use that kind of grouping for different aspects of a brand experience?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
So today we, instead of brand experience, we just say brand culture, and
Hmm.
we activate through four key dimensions. So communications, which is, what are the brand communications needed to tell the story? It's the customer experiences, the employee experiences, and what we call the products and services. So yeah.
Got it. And then underneath each of those dimensions, again, do you have any kind of, once you're trying to prototype based on an ideal brand experience, are there some kind of go-to experiences or touch points that you want to prototype, or does it really need to be tailored to what exactly is this brand? What do they do? What are their customers like? How does that usually work?
Yeah, definitely the latter, because
Okay.
context is everything, as you know. So I think as you're thinking about experiences for a SaaS software company are going to be very different than that for an automotive company, right? So the touch points that you're going to be thinking about and the journeys that you're going to be mapping for those customers are going to be vastly different. So we take that into account. And so when we do get to that prototyping stage, which we almost always do, we then dial in the experiences that matter for that particular brand, that particular audience or tribe, in this case, that we call it. So that's where we start to get very specific around taking these experience principles, this ideal experience we're trying to create, and then trying to model that through a number of different experiences, which can be both existing, making them better, but also net new experiences, which is also pretty typical in our work.
I'd love it if you could give an example. I don't know if there's a Liquid client or somebody you've been working with recently, but I'm especially curious if I'm the client and I'm sitting in one of these presentations from Liquid where you're starting to show some of these prototypes. What does that part feel like?
So recently, we were coming off of a 6-month engagement with the automotive repair franchise business. So it's a chain
Mm-hmm.
of quick service, repair shops where they'll do everything from oil changes to rebuild your engine. And they really were looking at the experience through a very limited way, through their brick and mortar experience when you come in, drop your car off, gets fixed, and so on. So what we did was we really wanted to bring them on a much bigger journey to think 10 years out. What would this experience start to look like for customers? How would it be different? And give them a roadmap for evolving the brand into the future. And it also includes the service offerings and everything that goes along with that, right? So it's not just physical services, but literally digital. What's the digital service equivalent look like?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. And so when you're going through strategy, as you know, you can get a lot of head nodding, you can get people agreeing on something, but until you start to make it come to life through prototypes, that's when the rubber hits the road, right? That's when your clients have that aha moment and they say, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking, or I wasn't thinking that at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that translation part I was telling you about earlier, right? So it's translating sort of the words on the page to now, what would that really look like?
Right.
Yeah. So for this particular automotive company, we identified 5 pillars of their experience that were going to be really critical to, one was around the physical architecture and the spaces, one was around digital, another was around new service models, new business models like subscription services and things like that. And so when you start to get really specific around those and you say, let's walk you through a clickable prototype of what a major repair would look like through a digital interface, which is completely new for them, right? They don't do that today. But when they see it, they go, oh my God, that's exactly where we think we need to go. And that's the kind of experiences our customers want. And we need to find a way to be able to deliver those.
I'm glad you said clickable interface, because I was just about to ask how deep you guys will go into these prototypes. And I guess that's always got to be a question, right? You can go so deep that it feels like you're almost building the product for them. But then if you don't go deep enough, maybe they don't get it. And it doesn't really help you or help the client envision what you're recommending. So is there, on something like that, I guess you can do mock-ups of an app and have it actually be clickable. You also mentioned architecture of the physical stores. So are you just mocking that up or doing renderings or something like that?
Yeah. So for the architecture, physical architecture, we worked with our affiliate in Chile, and they have an architecture practice, which is great. So they came in and they worked on retrofit designs for the existing stores. So what would a retrofit look like? And then what would a net new store look like, the kind of store of the future? And then those were rendered we actually rendered them on iPads, and then we did kind of a walkthrough experience. So that way the clients could hold them up and literally tap and literally move around and see the space from outside approach. And then as I walk through the space, what does that actually start to look like? And this is all, renders and things like that.
Yeah. And I love that you guys did the retrofit on the existing locations as well. That really tethers it to reality. I guess there's a risk in doing this that it can all be kind of pie in the sky, but it's nice to show that you've demonstrated some kind of recognition that there are business realities here, that they're not just going to tear down all their stores and build new ones overnight.
Totally agree. And for the digital experience, we actually modeled that using Envision, and you could click through on an iPhone. And that's what the customer sees, right? So there's a customer piece, and then we did a companion experience on an iPad to show what the employee sees, right? Because it's a connection between a service technician who's working on the vehicle and the customer who's interfacing from some other location now, no longer at the shop where the work's being done, but in the comfort of their home or at the mall or wherever they happen to be, right? And so it shows that the customer journey and what the actual experience will start to look like from both the employee side and also the customer side.
That's great. It kind of brings it back to that triangle and the importance of recognizing both sides of that. Are there any non-clients that you think of when you think of brand experience and just great examples? I don't know if you might even use them sometimes with clients to just inspire them and get them thinking about what a brand experience could be.
Yeah, those examples are always really helpful because I think clients need to have a point of reference, right? And in retail, we really love REI. I think REI is amazing at building what we call brand culture. And the reason we like them is because they really get the employee engagement side and how they need to embody the brand, not as like we dub a brand ambassador kind of way, in a false way, but really like, they want their employees to be just what their customers would do, right? Like, hey, grab this kayak and take it out this weekend and try it out and use it and bring it back and tell us what you think of it. And so these are employees that know the products really well. They use the products. They're the customers too, right? And that's amazing. So when a customer does go in, they're getting to interact with a store associate that has real hands-on experience and knowledge. So they know their stuff. They know what they're talking about. So they're living and breathing this brand just like the customer is on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. So they've really got that nailed, I think.
Great. This episode of How Brands Are Built is brought to you by Squad Help, the world's #1 naming platform. Here's how Squad Help works. You launch a naming contest to engage hundreds of naming experts. You're guided through an agency-level naming process that goes beyond traditional crowdsourcing. The platform uses AI and includes some name validation features, such as audience testing, trademark validation, linguistic analysis, and quality scoring. And Squad Help doesn't just do naming. You can also use their platform for taglines or slogans, as well as logo design. To launch your naming contest today, go to squadhelp.com and start receiving custom name suggestions instantly. Squad Help, company, brand, and business name ideas by experts. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rev.com, offering fast, affordable, accurate audio transcription and captions. I like to use Rev all the time. I use it to transcribe episodes of this podcast, but I also use it for client work, recorded interviews that I conduct during brand strategy projects. I often need transcriptions. It's hard to take notes when you're talking to interviewees, so I get transcripts from Rev. I've tried some other services, and I keep coming back to them because their transcriptions are the most accurate I've seen. The turnaround time is less than 24 hours, and transcriptions cost just $1 a minute. Right now, Rev is offering listeners for this show $10 off your first order. To get your $10 off coupon, visit rev.com/blog/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's rev.com/blog/HBAB. Rev, transcriptions made simple. One of the other things that you mentioned in that video from a few years back, and it's also, I guess, just common sense, is that to create a great brand experience, you really need to do some brand strategy or positioning work first. You need to understand the meaning behind the brand. Can you tell me a little bit about how you do that piece at Liquid, how you would document a brand? There are all kinds of models and frameworks out there, some of which we've explored on the blog. I'm just curious if Liquid has one that you guys like to use or how you approach that.
Absolutely. We all have our secret sauce or method, I guess, of getting there. So I'd say there's three major steps, right? Mm-hmm. First is really discovery and research, and that's looking at it from the customer perspective, the business perspective, and the market perspective. So we need our inputs, right? And I think that's something that is a very important step. We do a lot of quant research to identify the tribe and make sure we know who the customer is we're actually designing the brand for. So that is a big part of our process. So we spend about anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks in that phase of work before the clients really see anything.
Okay.
And that's an important first foundational step. Then we build that into what we call a perspective. And the perspective is really the synthesis and the distillation of everything we found. And it's less findings, and I'd say it's more insights and themes and patterns. So what are we seeing? What's the so what of all this stuff? And we use that to start to frame up positioning territory. So how might we position the brand given everything we learned? And then we go into the brand swarm, which we'd typically spend 2 days, and we'd level set all the participants on what we learned through the perspective. And then we take them through, like I said, about 5 activities that gives us input that we can then take away and then distill later and then put into the brand platform. So the brand platform is the thing we're trying to end up with.
Right.
And for us, we have 5 main components of a brand platform. There's the brand position, which is the most important element. It's the thing in the middle, the thing you want the brand to stand for in the minds and the hearts of your tribe. There's the aspiration of the brand, which kind of gives it that future proof, that headroom, so it isn't just limited to today. Brand promise, which is very important for messaging and setting up the value props, the ideal brand experience, which I mentioned earlier, and then the expression attributes, which is really that look, tone, sound, and feel of the brand.
Got it. And so that's where you would get to some of the personality aspects of the brand.
Yeah, like tone of voice and things like that, for sure.
Great. And in each of those 5 areas, are you typically writing out sort of pithy statements or paragraphs or bullet point lists of words, or is it just a mix of those types of things?
It's totally a mix, and it depends. The activities we've designed over the years and developed, we found get at these things in different ways. So we do what we call one level of of abstraction from the actual thing itself. So meaning we don't say, okay, client, we're going to have you write out your positioning statement, because that is very almost impossible to do, as you know, like especially in a pressure situation, you're in a workshop and you're trying to nail that statement, right? It's just not going to happen. So we use our exercises or activities to get them thinking about it, but in a different way. So they're kind of in a roundabout way addressing these questions. So for brand position, we use onlyness, and they have to write a simple construct of what makes them the only brand in their category. And so it's a very deceptively simple question. And we have a whole worksheet that they kind of work through together to get at it.
And then you would take that, and so you wouldn't be delivering back to them the, I don't want to say correct, but the sort of final version of that onlyness statement. Instead, you would be taking all of those as inputs and delivering back something that fits within that brand platform you described earlier.
Correct. Because it's not a one-for-one necessarily. So we found that we don't do a brand promise activity, because we found that certain activities, other activities we do, actually get to the brand promise in a different way. Sometimes it's through a brand archetype exercise we do. Sometimes it's through the onlyness, or sometimes it's both. And it just emerges and it becomes evident to us. But the clients would probably never recognize it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you guys at Liquid are maybe less precious or wordsmithy about those types of statements because of the way you lean on design thinking and this lean startup idea of let's just get the words down on a page, do some prototyping, and then if we have to iterate, we can, but let's not spend weeks or months trying to get the phrase right that sits at the top of this framework?
Yeah. That is a thorny question in a way. And the reason I say that is, yes, we tend to focus on the concepts and what they mean, and we're less concerned about the language we're using, because this is internal language anyway. It's not like it's going to be your tagline or whatever. Clients, though, and we have found when we do bring it back, that word choice and language can be a barrier to acceptance of a simple idea. So it can be, one word can be the blocker for the concept. So if we get the word out of the way that they object to, we might still find the concept is correct. And so we have found ourselves tailoring language just to kind of help with the sell-in of the concept itself.
Sure. It's always striking that balance between selling the idea that you know is right for them, but also kind of getting past the selling stage and getting to the doing stage.
Correct.
Great. I have a couple of wrap-up questions for you. You talked a little about REI. I usually ask about some kind of favorite brands or brands that you think are doing a great job outside of even just thinking about brand experience, but just in general. Are there any other companies that you think of when you think of great brands?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a lot of great brands, I think. One, and I've mentioned it before, I think Alaska Airlines is really getting it in the airline category, which is not a category that generally people love those brands. Southwest, I know, is pretty classic. I think people either love Southwest or they hate it, which is, I think, the hallmark of a great brand.
It all comes down to the boarding.
Yeah.
Comes down to that boarding policy of no assigned seats. I think you either love that or hate that.
Yeah, but I think it's a great brand that can do that, right? Because you don't want to be everything to everyone. So I think for Alaska, I think they're kind of taking a different approach, but I think the acquisition of Virgin America really has rubbed off on them in many ways, and I think in many good ways. And I see that brand is starting to develop its own voice, its own sort of take on airline travel, and making it actually a pleasant thing to do and not a drudgery, which is what, most of it is today.
You've seen it. It's funny. I think one of the other interviews I've done, somebody mentioned loving Virgin and being a little bit disappointed post-acquisition, but that may have been a while ago. Do you feel like Alaska has sort of slowly started to improve itself, or you've seen a trajectory since the acquisition?
Completely have seen it.
That's great.
But I was always an Alaska flyer, so I have a different point of view. And if I was a Virgin American flyer, and that was being taken away, of course I'm going to object to that and say, wait a minute, what happened to my brand? That I loved all these things about the Virgin that made it quirky and fun to fly and all those things. But what's interesting is that the acquiring brand, in this case, Alaska, is their brand is being influenced by that acquisition in some really, I think, positive ways.
Interesting. Do you have any book recommendations? It doesn't have to be a branding book specifically, but anything that's influenced your work or that you think is relevant for people who do brand work to read?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's funny, when I got into this business, in the branding business in particular, it was about 2001, coming off of the .com explosion and all those things, and I had an opportunity to go to this agency called ID Branding in Portland. It's a very small agency, and I thought, I know branding. I got there and I realized I didn't know anything about branding. I really didn't know, because it's such a very specific discipline, as you know. So I just started reading a lot of books, and the first book that really resonated with me was a book called Positioning: The Battle for the Mind. You might remember it. It's pretty old. Of course. It's a classic, though. It's Al Reese, Jack Trout, and I feel like that I started to get it, like what positioning was about, and this idea that it occupies a space in your mind. And then years later, when I read The Brand Gap by Marty Neumeier, before I was working with him, I was like, this makes sense to me. I totally get it, and it's actually much simpler than all the academics have written about, right? So I feel like those are some foundational books. But today, I'd say a good book is Fusion. I don't know if you've read that book.
I haven't. Is that by Denise?
Yeah,
Yon?
Denise Yon. And it's interesting because she's writing about integrating brand and culture to create really powerful brands and companies. And so now I might quibble with how she thinks about some of these concepts, definitely different than we do here at Liquid, but there's a similarity. I think anybody that's writing on this subject, I'm kind of a fan of right now, because I feel like these are the stories that need to be told, and I feel like it's a good point of reference for today.
Great. I'll pick that one up. Last question, Dennis. I know that you have a graphic design degree and that was your background or your education. I know you've also taught strategy at Portland State University. So I guess on two fronts, both as a designer turned strategist, I'm curious your kind of take coming from that angle, but also as someone who's taught and certainly led students and helped them understand concepts and maybe even given them some career advice. What advice do you have for either junior people in your agency or other agencies, or people that aren't even in the industry yet but are just interested in trying their hand at this thing we call branding?
Well, the first thing I would say is get smart on the subject. Because again, I think when you think of branding, it's a very broad term. You think you might know it, but it's a very deep and narrow subject, and I think getting a handle on it is really important. So the thing I would recommend is actually work with people that know what they're doing. Yeah, which I'd say in almost any field, right? Really get good mentoring, see how it's done up close, and learn it if you can in a hands-on way. And if you can't do that, then the next best step is to read about it, right? And really, so I would say those are some things. We've actually just created a really great intern program at Liquid. We're debuting it this summer, called the Dive Shop, and it's a chance for interns to come in and actually have that hands-on experience. And it's a 10-week program. They come in, they do it together as a cohort. We have 7 divers, we call them, and they not only get to learn about the principles of brand culture that we use here at Liquid, but they also are going to work on a real client. So they actually get that experience to get to apply it. Yeah. So I just feel like any chance anybody can get to actually do it is always going to be the best.
That's great that you're able to have such a large number of interns as well, because it feels like they will, like you said, a cohort, they'll be able to bounce ideas off of each other. It's a real shared experience. For smaller agencies, it seems like they're usually looking more for 2 or 3, but 7 is a really, really good number.
Yeah, it's also spread across a couple of our offices, so they get a cross-office experience, and we get to bring in different disciplines to work together. So it's not just all creatives or all strategists, for example, but it's a little bit of everybody kind of working together. Yeah.
I look forward to hearing how that goes, and I hope it's something that you guys continue.
We do too.
All right. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for making time to chat today, and hope we'll talk again soon. Thanks for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you liked the episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's an easy way to support the show and help others find out about it. To learn more about Dennis, visit Liquid at liquidagency.com. where you can find his bio, some blog posts he's written, and more information about the agency and its approach. In the episode write-up, I'll share the video we talked about, as well as a full transcript of the conversation. In other news, last week I mentioned Fabian Gerhalter's online workshop. I just got an email from Fabian saying he's now offering that workshop at a reduced price, and you can still get 10% off if you follow the link from the How Brands Are Built website and use the promo code HBAB. Check it out if you're interested, and contact me if you have any trouble finding the link. Lastly, if you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, please consider doing so. It comes out just about once a month. It has links to some of the most interesting branding-related news that I've read, and content from the podcast and blog and more. Just visit the site to sign up. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time.